Yoshiko. There is not a doubt in my mind that generations of all ages are reconnecting with the works of William Morris. From wallpaper to his philosophies to even the fashion runways, generations are connecting with the name William Morris more now than ever. And our next speaker was there in the beginnings of the revival and can attest to the everlasting appeal of William Morris. Yoshiko Yamamoto is the founder and proprietor of Arts and Crafts Press. Born and raised in Tokyo, Yoshiko's love of printmaking began early. As a teenager, her favorite pastime was to wander through the old dusty bookshops and print shops, collecting the traditional Japanese woodblock prints. And as she is a UC Berkeley grad, go Bears, she and her husband, Bruce Smith, founded the Arts and Crafts Press in 1996. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend and the founder of the Arts and Crafts Press, Yoshiko Yamamoto.
All right. Okay, let me get set up over here. And, oh, actually I can't see these. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Kate, for inviting me to speak. By the way, can you hear me okay back there? Yes. All right, and how is my lovely Japanese accent this morning? Well, brace yourself, you'll hear lots of it in the next 40 minutes. Okay, well, it's really actually an honor for me to be here and talk about William Morris, which is my favorite topic, and his legacy and influences in the 21st century. Speaking from a maker's perspective, as a current day craftsperson and a woodblock printer. Now, when you talk about William Morris today, you can see his influences through designs mostly, as you see here in New York Fashion Week, or with Morris bathrooms, or with wallpaper produced and sold worldwide by the original Morris & Company. Or to wallpaper you can wear these dresses from British fashion retailer H&M. I bought one 2 years ago. To Morris-inspired paintings by this wonderful artist. I saw his work in Seattle, who says he shares Morris's artistic DNA. I don't know how he did that. Or with beautiful Morris phone cases, I want one. And how about a Morris kimono? I can do that. Or a cup of tea with biscuits. You can always decompress with Morris leggings, or ease the stress of modern life away with Morris vegan hand cream. Or express yourself with William Morris tattoo. Really, too many choices. And these are the Morris dry gins. Yes, you're ready for a drink? But you know what? The advertisement for this company says, William Morris is the famous poet and artist who lived in Switzerland. Did I read that wrong? It can nearly drive me to drink, really. But this is not what I really want to talk about today. In the southwest of England, there is a newly started brewery inspired not by Morris's designs, but by his ideals, as expressed in his utopian novel, News from Nowhere. The owner of this brewery said that he started the venture with, I quote here, core principles that come from the arts and crafts period of reusing and recycling, of making the workplace a good place to be, of respecting that it's the artisan, yes, who operates the machines that create great products, not the machines themselves. This guy gets it. And the brewery owner continues, we try to encapsulate those values and the connection between the producer and the natural world and how we have an obligation to look after it. Morris would have approved, I think. Crafting, the idea of making honest product by hand with respect for the earth and craft beer? What a way to honor William Morris or Topsy's legacy today, especially in Asheville here, the brewery capital. And this is the legacy I want to explore today with you. From my own perspective, as a woodblock cover and printer, to discuss with you what it really might mean to be an arts and crafts enthusiast today and what relevance William Morris has for us now in the 21st century. I'll examine these from historical explanations and including my own experiments. Now, I've been coming to this conference with my husband, Bruce Smith, who can't be here today, for a quarter century now. First, as a publisher, then as an artist. Through the years, hearing great talks here, and reading books and talking with friends at the Great Hall, and in my studies at the university, I've had much time to think about Morris, his relevance, the work he left behind, and the arts and crafts movement itself. And especially since I moved our studio 2 years ago to Kamakura, Japan, when I wanted to be closer to my aging mother as COVID changed the world and the border was closing, I decided to study the craft of carving and printing a little bit more seriously over there in a printing capital in Japan. Now, this physical and mental space and distance gave me time to think about our own work at the press for the last 25 years and the meaning of the original movement to us, to collectors, and to wonderful craftspeople here at the conference, and to our future generation. Okay, as I'm sure you can gather, now I believe that the arts and crafts movement is not just about style. Well, let's just look at the range of simple or not so simple chairs, from Morris's Sussex chair here to Gustav Stickley's open armchair, or from this Art Nouveau piece, beautiful, to the living room chair designed by Green & Green architects in 1907 for the Robert Blacker House. Even though the movement was manifested in various styles, what was central, though, was, I think, a yearning for the simpler method of production and a healthier lifestyle, and therefore, a quest for happiness for everyone, to put it simply in my own words, or as Morris put it beautifully, the reward of labor is life. Is that not enough? And that's always a good question to come back to. Yes, the movement started with the granddad of the movement, John Ruskin, in the 1850s. You heard about him over and over, preaching that we must go back to the Middle Ages to get away from the shoddy, overly ornamented, factory-produced Victorian furnishings. To William Morris, our hero, too, it spread to America and the continent and beyond, even reaching to where I live now, in Japan. Now, let us stop for a moment before we go on. Look around you and at all of you and all of us ourselves. Some of us who have been coming to this conference for over 30 years, and the lines of the newly initiated coming into the Great Hall each year. There is no doubt there is passion here, or some dangerous obsession for some people. Incurable. What draws us here? When we look at Gustav Stickley, for example, some coveted collector might seek to find that one unusual piece, let's say, a particular Eastwood chair circa 1905. But to me, Gus's humanity and his superhuman energy that created the craftsman empire from his own factory, farms, education facility for the youth, to a full-fledged utopian community. That's what draws my heart. And is this not what draws you and stirs your emotion and imagination even to this day? As many of you know, Gus Stickley adopted as his motto the Dutch words, as they come, I think I said it right, meaning the best that I can, as a variation of William Morris's si je puis, the French words that mean I will if I can. Here showing a leaded glass window designed by Morris at his earliest home, the Red House. So, to begin, let's go back to the granddad, to Ruskin's England, the mid-19th century London. This was a time under Queen Victoria of rapid changes due to industrialization, people moving from the countryside to urban industrial core looking for work, with growing slums and row houses in the cities, while industrial workers, children and adults, labored from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and, can you believe it? No health benefits, bonuses, or vacations for these folks. Now, Ruskin was the intellectual giant and influential art critic and social reformer, criticizing how industrial work stripped workers of any individual expression, creativity, or thinking, with factory owners treating them more like slaves. Instead, John Ruskin looked to the medieval era as the ideal society. He taught drawings and art history at Oxford, lectured throughout England, and lecturing was the activity people really attended back then. So he was the, today's equivalent of YouTube influencer or TED talker. He was big, and his passion inspiring many people, including our William Morris. One day in 1874, Ruskin took a group of Oxford students out to North Hinksey, west of Oxford, with a hoe in his hand and with passion on the other, to have them go out and work on the art of road building to promote the idea of working for the greater good and satisfaction through labor. This all sounds so proper and Victorian, but let's remember how avant-garde it must have been back then. Ruskin looked to the medieval guild as an ideal community that would ensure workers job, security, and even creativity. So, in his later years, he tried to establish his own utopian community, the Guild of St. George in Sheffield, which continues today, and there is an American chapter as well, and set up a series of communities around England where people could get back to nature, grow their own food, and work with their hands. To come to think about it, really, these are incredibly 21st century ideas. Way ahead of his time, through his own observation of clouds, glaciers, mountains, and storms, Ruskin, an accomplished painter, also predicted climate warming sounding alarm at the changes he was observing in the natural world due to pollution from the rapid industrialization. And this is more than 170 years ago. He was way ahead of his time and sometimes overshadowed by his later misfortunes that we tend to overlook his contributions. Ruskin's vision, this is in his later years, to create a new national culture through handwork was utopian and influenced so many leaders and thinkers, from Tolstoy to Gandhi and to our hero, William Morris. Now let me take you for a moment to a small churchyard in the village of Kelmscott in Oxfordshire, England. As so many of you might have made the pilgrimage there, I made mine there a few years back. It's a place I go back to often in my mind. It's been over a century since William Morris, the father of the arts and crafts movement, or Topsy, he was called by his friends, was laid to rest there. I went there as I'm working on a project to illustrate Morris's utopian novel, News from Nowhere. On my visit there, I was quite touched by the austere simplicity of the headstone, especially remembering how energetic and bumbly he was as a person. You can see from these wonderful cartoons by Burne-Jones. The stone lay there quietly, without giving a casual visitor any hint of Morris's prodigious achievements in the areas spanning from literature to the decorative arts and architecture and politics to publishing and historic preservation. This guy never slept, and I like to work, but I am no match to this guy. Morris tried to revive various crafts just as Ruskin proposed, rolling up his sleeves, learning to dye, weave, carve, print, paint, and embroider. And it is said that Morris never designed anything he didn't know how to do with his own hands. Here's the River Thames. As many of you know, News from Nowhere by William Morris was originally written in a serial form for a socialist publication. He was the editor of it in 1890. It's a story that takes place in the future along River Thames, about a time after the so-called socialist revolution has taken place in England and the capitalistic society has been dismantled. It's about a man, William, the guest, from the Victorian age, who falls asleep one night and magically wakes up in this future society, finding that the people in the future are dressed in a beautiful dress, sort of resembling medieval garbs, and they're all beautiful, robust, and healthy. He travels upriver, discovering that these people of the future work for the joy of it, leaving their children unattended to school themselves in the woods. They have no idea of concept of money. So these folks and the guest talk about handcraft, politics, education, economy, human nature, and love along the way. And the story ends at the village of Kelmscott, at this small medieval church near his beloved Kelmscott Manor. In Morris's brilliant vision of utopia, there was no private property, no industrialization, no money, no capitalist system. Energy was created from wind power to create no pollution. Everyone worked cooperatively, taking pleasure in their labor. And by the way, we are still waiting for his revolution to happen. Where did it go? His vision, I have found, and others have found also, is really inspirational. For me, it's like adult's fairy tale. And there are some issues that still need to be worked out, but it's a great vision. But there is a conundrum that Morris couldn't solve in his work or in his life. His beautiful wallpapers and textiles, commissioned by the wealthy in England or America, such as here in Chicago for H.H. Richardson's Glessner House, were unaffordable for common folks. Or this masterwork, I think Andre talked about that yesterday, often considered the most beautiful book in history, the Kelmscott edition of the work of Geoffrey Chaucer, the most ambitious undertaking of his Kelmscott press, at 568 pages long, and it weighed 17 pounds, equivalent of 6 of your MacBook Pros put together, or 17-pound turkey ready to go into the Thanksgiving feast. It was illustrated with 87 woodcut images designed by Edward Burne-Jones, and woodcut images of capital letters and frames designed by Morris himself. Here's Burne-Jones and Morris. They began working on this project in 1891. Morris was 55 years old, good ripe old age. Well, I wouldn't say old age, since I am 55 this year, and just finished before his death in 1896. But it remains a work of contradictions, sublimely beautiful, but its cost was the equivalent of 3 months' wage of the average working person. It was not affordable to the wealthy, and from this person, a leader in socialist causes who worked tirelessly on behalf of working class people. Morris died soon after the publication of this book, leaving us the big conundrum that even Topsy couldn't solve in his lifetime. Now, here in America, we have Albert Hubbard, or shall we say, Frau Albertus. He claimed that he met William Morris in 1892 during his trip to London. Now, this is denied, by the way, by May Morris, Morris's daughter, who called him that obnoxious imitator. But I love Hubbard. He sported long hair, had his signature large floppy bow tie, and broad-brimmed hats. Whether or not he met Morris, Hubbard did, in 1895, create the semi-communal medievalistic village of Roycroft in East Aurora, New York, complete with craft studios, producing furniture, pottery, metalwork, rugs, baskets, lighting. And in the tradition of Morris, he also set up his own press and bindery. On the left here is Hubbard, with his second wife, Alice, proofing pages. Now, his most popular essay, Message to Garcia, was reprinted over 100,000 times. I can't even imagine that. With his folksy style and one-liners, his popularity grew to a cult status. Here's another influencer, I think, of the day. Thousands of visitors came to the Roycroft campus. To accommodate the visitors, Hubbard knew what to do. He built his Roycroftian, furnishing it with the simple American arts and crafts furniture, Roycroft china, and Roycroft lanterns. Well, always a great self-promoter, he had started out as a Larkin soap salesman. But he was a polarizing figure. For some, he was a true prophet of the arts and crafts, no doubt about it. But to others, like May here, she was a wonderful embroiderist and designer and artist in her own right, but she called Hubbard a mere poser. Surprisingly, Hubbard aligned himself politically with Morris, claiming himself a socialist and anarchist. That I can believe. But working with Alice, second wife, they were able to run their arts and crafts community with great profit, which didn't happen often with arts and crafts communities, and ardently defended free enterprise while being a socialist. A little bit of a contradiction here. Upholding its American belief in individual hard work and competitiveness. To this, real socialists said, Hubbard sold out. Well, it's a sad historic irony that, as you know, we didn't get to witness Albert and Alice complete their vision at Roycroft. The two were killed on board the Lusitania in 1915, when the boat was sunk off the Irish coast by a German torpedo. And this, by the way, is the last photo we know to exist of them together before they boarded the Lusitania on their last journey. That makes me cry. Okay, let me now jump to the other side of the country, to where we used to live, the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I like to mention here briefly two artists, brothers, who worked there, Waldo and Corwin Chase. By the time the arts and crafts movement reached the Pacific Northwest, the glamour and appeal of Morris's movement had faded away in England, Europe, and much of America. The Chase brothers' parents were both artists. Their mother, a pictorialist photographer, the father, a coppersmith. Great environment to raise an arts and crafts kid. Both boys studied art, taught art, and then turned to block printing. Waldo, here, the elderly brother, had the idea to get out and live in the wilderness of Western Washington. Clearly, he was inspired by the principles of the arts and crafts movement to reject mechanization and instead to embrace materials and craft process, to live the life of the arts and crafts ideals to its fullest. As described in Corwin's memoir, Teepee Fire, throughout the late 1920s, Waldo and Corwin lived on various parts of Mount Rainier. They also lived in teepees that they erected on a privately owned beach known as Yacht Haven, that's an arts and crafts colony, all the while creating vivid woodblock prints, showcasing the Northwest landscapes. Now, you could definitely call them tree huggers, or the brothers loved the mountains, lived in the forest, playing at living like Native Americans. Sick of the capitalist system, they decided to forsake it to live in the woods, emulating the Native American way of life. Here is Corwin Chase posing nude. Time to wake up, everyone. His body painted with swirly bullseye pattern with batik dye, and I hear it was painted by his lady friends. Interesting to think that Edward Curtis, as you know, was producing photographs in the vicinity using Native American models to evoke a similar sense of bygone era. But what different sensibilities they inhabited. The brothers learned their craft from a 1916 instructional book written by Frank Morley Fletcher, adding their own artistic expressions, especially emphasizing the light in an impressionistic manner. In 1927, the brothers had a great chance to study with this gentleman from Japan, Yamagishi Kazue, a visiting Japanese woodblock print artist, alongside with a talented Elizabeth Coren. Now, Yamagishi is known today in Japan as one of the best carvers that existed in modern history. Here is Yamagishi's own design and execution. Chase brothers admired Japanese depiction of Mount Fuji, you see here, the sacred mountain, and created the image of their own mountain to worship, Mount Rainier, in their prints. After a few years of living together in a teepees together, Corbin married, but Waldo continued to live in a simple hut, made like a Japanese-style dwelling, producing artwork and embracing a simpler lifestyle amongst the trees of Washington State until his death in 1988. The brothers took the idea of the simple life of the arts and crafts movement to its extreme, making art simply, trying to leave no human trace behind. I'm going to drink a little bit of water. Oh, that's good. Now, let me speak for a few minutes as a maker, as a craftsperson, living and working today. For my husband, Bruce, and me personally, there is no denying that the arts and crafts movement, and especially Morris, was our touchstone, a guidepost for what we wanted to do when we opened our own studio in the mid-90s. It's always been for us about ideals tempered by economic realities and about working at our craft, often cooperatively with others, like the Dart Hunter Studios here, who has been our work partner for the last quarter century. We never quarrel except to decide who gets to pay for dinner. It's a mean to achieve an art that has a vision about how life might be lived, and like the movement itself, our own career or path has been far from linear. A better word might be organic or complex, or should we just say messy? We have printed books and a periodical, posters and note cards, booklets and broadsides. We have researched and written about the movement and edited and published others' writings. And over the years, I have learned to carve and print books, using this to make prints, book illustrations, and designs for tiles, such as these made by Motabi Tile Works. And such projects as block prints for the Gamble House Centennial Celebration in 2008, and they have the table downstairs, or this view of the Stickley Farms in Morris Plains, New Jersey, and I believe this print is still available. Craft has always been important to both of us, and I'm sure it is for so many of you here, and for the wonderful exhibitors at this conference, from metalwork, pottery, block printing, here, Laura Wilder, artwork, needlework, jewelry making, glasswork, to furniture making, and to bookmaking. Oh, that's important. Where did it go? It keeps going the wrong way. Oh, I'm going to show that picture. Here a page from our speaker yesterday, Andre Chavez, who has been producing a series of gorgeous letterpress printed books with beautiful illustrations that he creates himself, some very reminiscent of Morris. I think he shares the artistic DNA with Morris. Maybe he knows the secret. He's a doctor. For my husband here on the left, and myself, for him, the craft of writing has been always important. I call him my wordsmith, since his last name is Smith. At the press, I did the graphic work, and he did the writing and editing. Our own discovery of Morris and the historic movement, our inspiration, so to speak, all started one afternoon in Carmel in 1988, way before we started our printing studio. When we visited the studio of Charles Sumner Green in Carmel, the older of the two Green brothers, as you know, the architects who created the ultimate Japanese bungalows in Pasadena areas, like the Gamble House here, shown here. Now, Charles was, of course, long gone by the time we visited, but his son, Did Green, that was his nickname, was still living there in that incredible home that his father, Charles, had designed as his own art and meditation studio. But I think he was a little self-centered because he built this meditation studio for himself while his family lived in a little shack next to it. The son laid out for us a treasure trove of the tools, reference books, photographs, and notes, little sketch and scribbled poems that the reclusive architect had left behind. And I was encouraged to touch all the furniture. You can't do that at Gamble House today. I stood next to a door that had a carving by Charles. This is his later years, only halfway finished. Pencil marks on it showing where he was going to carve next. It looked as though he might walk in there that afternoon to complete the unfinished work. It was a magical space where he felt the presence of this inspired architect. And we were hooked. We went on to research more, going to the archives of Charles Green's papers at UC Berkeley. And one of the things we found there was a letter that the architect had written to one of his clients in 1902, where he had written, "I am in thorough sympathy with the William Morris movement." It's like finding gold here. We wondered, what did he mean by that? The William Morris movement, socialist or arts and crafts movement? So we were curious and ended up researching and writing 2 books about the movement, and Bruce on his own wrote 2 books on the architecture of Green and Green. I began my own research at the university and wrote my thesis about Yanagi Soetsu, who is shown here, and Mingei movement, the William Morris-inspired folk craft movement in Japan. Now, it's easy to say now, we probably could have stopped there and then, and should have. But as most of you know it here, it's hard to stop once you catch the bug of the arts and crafts movement. We especially have grown to love the carefully printed books and small magazines, so beautifully produced back then. We had started collecting them as part of our researches. That's always a good excuse, right? And then the idea of making a beautiful publication about the arts and crafts movement caught our imagination. We wanted to publish, and we wanted to do it with our own hands. So we decided to start our own small publishing house, aptly named the Arts and Crafts Press, and make our own current-day version of books and periodicals made carefully by hand, made for readers, and made economically, just as Morris had wished. That's our homework for a century. It was different back then now. In the late 1990s, right before the dot-com boom, where we were living in Berkeley and San Francisco area, there was an active community of those who loved things arts and crafts. Like other areas of the countries, I'm sure, Boston, Chicago, Denver, Pasadena, and Seattle, where I ended up. And I think Seattle folks are just doing great because I still get occasional invites, even though I'm in Japan. But in Berkeley in particular, we gathered almost weekly for dinners, lectures, events, exchanges, and show and tell of all things relating to the arts and crafts. And we usually borrowed Janet Mark's living room for that. Thank you, Janet. We formed Northern California Arts and Crafts Guild, inviting speakers from afar, exhibiting together occasionally. When Bruce, my husband, and I bought our first antique printing presses for the press, Diane Ayers, who spoke yesterday about textiles, and Tim Hansen, who is here today, members of the Guild, generously offered us the back area of their textile studio space to house our new printing presses, and no rent passed hands ever. Thank you, Tim and Diane, for your generosity. What we started with, and one of our longest running project, was that tabby, and I'm sure there are many subscribers to the tabby. And again, I don't want to just keep thanking everybody, but I do want to use this occasion to really appreciate all the support you have given us over the years. It's a small magazine we published devoted to the arts and crafts movement. Our goal was to chronicle not just the historic movement, but also the current day revival that was happening then. Bruce, my husband, wrote that we wanted to make each issue not just a work of substance, but a work of craft. Each issue was letterpress printed and bound by hand using needle and thread. Now, let's remember that economics has been a big issue with the arts and crafts movement. As Morris wrote, I do not want art for a few, any more than education for a few, or freedom for few. So at our press, we felt it was important for us to keep the price relatively affordable. We didn't want to make books or publish magazines to have it only affordable for collectors or institutions. Definitely echoes of Morris's conundrum kept ringing in our minds in those days. We wanted to make things that were to be used, words to be read, so we charged only $15 a copy for the tabby when we started, only to go up to $20 when the page count increased. We would print about 1,000 copies of each issue of the tabby, each page hand-fed into the press. If there were 2 colors in the page, each copy of that page had to be fed into the press twice. Now, in hindsight, no, it wasn't very realistic. But yes, for sure, we were young and foolish and idealists. I was still a grad student in history, studying by day, learning to print at night, juggling double duties. When my classes would finish, I would start printing at the studio at night. Eventually, we acquired our own studio space. This is a small print that I did of that. And a black sharp cat named Ruskin, you see here. Sometimes I would have to stand at the press all night to get a press run finished while Ruskin the cat nodded away. Good old days. One of our first chapbooks was a reprint of a 1906 history of the arts and crafts movement, written by Mabel Took Priestman, with a wonderful introduction by the late Cheryl Robertson, a wonderful researcher and a friend who spoke here several times. Written just as the arts and crafts movement was coming into full bloom in the early 20th century. It showed how alive and vibrant it was over a century ago, something we felt was happening in the late 1990s. We also published a book on Arthur Wesley Dow's influence on American arts and crafts movement. This was a talk given here, actually, based on a talk by Tommy and Beth Ann McPherson. I think that started the whole Dow craze here at the Grove Park for a while. One of my favorite projects to this day is the small case-bound book, a book about Lucia Kleinhans Matthews, a forgotten artist who, with her husband, the famed muralist and painter Arthur Matthews were major figures in the San Francisco arts and crafts movement, creating together both Philopolis Press and the furniture shop. Without question, publishing books and periodicals was a lot of fun, and it was rewarding. But personally, I couldn't stop there stop myself from trying something new. And I began experimenting with carving and colors and making relief prints, posters, and greeting cards. In hindsight, our grand experiment of making beautiful books by hand at affordable prices, no surprise, turned out to be not so profitable. It was quite a struggle to make a living at this. So labor-intensive, and this was not a hobby for us, and it was our livelihood. However, with the graphic work of mine and artwork I began producing, our print studio became quite busy. Well, busy enough to have a first paid apprentice, then 2 or 3 full-time employees, young people, who also shared the love of working with their hands. And eventually, we were able to offer benefits, bonuses, and paid vacations, although I couldn't afford that for myself. As time went on, we gradually had to give up the publishing. Myself focusing on my graphic work, and Bruce on his writing. Here is one of my young employees here showing how the printing works. Now, let me come back to the central question of the day, to Morris's idealism and why William Morris today. The question of what it means for us to work with our hands today. What is the role of craft? Remember, in the beginning, I mentioned the craft brew owner who is trying to keep Morris's idealism alive. What is the role of machines? What is the meaning in the handwork when we have CNCs or laser cutters that cut designs faster? Or 3D printers building up homes now? Why use our own hands? Well, over the years, at our press, we worked with everything from 1900s clamshell presses like this one. This is Gordon, and it sort of comes together like this. And then I will be hand feeding the paper like this, and clickety-clack, clickety-clack, just about this speed. And then I can probably print 600 pages in an hour. That's comfortable. 2, 1940s proof presses, a Vandercook, my favorite, that we used to print larger block prints at a slow and steady pace. It's much slower because you need to load the paper in from the left side, ink the paper, and crank it to the right, and the whole unit comes back to the left. I can do probably 200 imprints in an hour. Now, eventually to 1960s Heidelberg cylinder printing presses, the monsters, which weighed over 2 tons. Now, because it's named Heidelberg, I call them Heidi 1, Heidi 2, and I had Heidi 3 eventually. They were beautiful machines that showcased the best of the 20th century human technology. Heidi's could print as many as 6,000 pages in an hour. They spared me many hours of standing at the press and back pain from hand feeding the paper. I used these presses to print all my greeting cards. But using Heidi the Heidelberg had its drawbacks. It was very hard to maintain without a specialist knowledge. I had a press mechanic for this press. And it was rather noisy and created a constant vibration that was physically exhausting. And it made this like a shushing sound it used a suction to pick up the paper. And it went like, I see you, I see you, I see you. Yes, the presses spoke. It said, I see you, at midnight, and it was creepy. So Morris wrote that it was the allowing of the machines to be our masters and not our servants that so injured the beauty of life, and my machine was watching me. Here's another view of my Heidi's. But I love these presses because I spent more hours with these presses than with my husband. Now, when COVID-19 shut down our economy 2 years ago, I did find that situation cathartic. I think for many of you, it was that way. It gave me the time to rethink what we were doing, what I have been working towards, a complete letterpress printing studio. And it was something I was really proud of. I've been building that for over 20 years, learning the skills, and really enjoyed working there with younger people. And it was becoming an active community art space too, where we taught occasional classes, had small exhibits, and studio tours. But with COVID, we decided we are going to close it and find the homes for all the presses, which I did, and start anew. Our employees were ready also to take the challenge, and with the long unemployment, they actually were able to start their career in the meantime. And I was to move to Japan and unlearn what I have learned in the last 20 years, and study deeply the woodblock printing in Japan, work in a traditional style, and learn to take care of my own tools. Today, I have this little tool that doesn't even weigh a pound, a baren, B-A-R-E-N. I'm learning now, used to print with, to press the paper down onto an inked block. This particular one was made by a baren maker I'm studying with, Mr. Goto. Here you can see him, who often spends over 8 months on one piece, making it, each coil inside knotted and threaded from a particular bamboo, which he grows himself in the southern region in Japan, as he wanted to make sure to keep the supply of that particular bamboo species. That really shocked me, and I think that's one of the reasons I have decided I wanted to pursue this route, because he's not just making the baren by hand, but he is a steward of the bamboo forest. This small tool is not cheap by any means, but it will last generations with care and mending. So I'm currently taking classes with other folks like this, with this master craftsman, to make my own baren. I'm also working with a great carver, Mr. Asaka, and a printer whose family has been hand printing for several centuries. There is just so much to learn. It's my personal quest, so I can work just with my hands, brush, and burnishing tool in an ecological fashion. To produce prints at a slower pace, to work on the whole aspect of printmaking, as it has been done for centuries in Japan. And the craftsmen, these craftspeople are dying out. They are getting older, so I feel like I must latch onto them and learn everything I can before they perish. It may seem like a long way from where we started, my husband and I, but may not be so. I think it's the trajectory that each of us are following, the journey of living as a maker, or living with arts and crafts aspirations in the 21st century. Well, what is it that we value here in the movement, as I discussed, from Ruskin, Morris, Hubbard, and Chase brothers this morning? Or other utopian communities like Rose Valley, who has an exhibit here, or Ruskin Colony, or Berkeley, or in the work we've seen around us this weekend. It's not the work produced in factories in far-off countries, shipped to us in large containers. None of it, I think, has been created solely by a 3D printer. Yes, there is a place for 3D printers, let's face it, like making artificial ears, I hear, or building inexpensive homes to solve the housing issues. But let's look at the essence of the arts and crafts movement. After all, is this not the first slow movement? The quest to consciously not make something faster, but make it well by an individual, by hand, because, as Morris said earlier, reward of labor is life. And is this not about community, like the workshops and discussions at this GPI conference? Us sharing these pleasures, these crafts and thoughts together, and also, is this not a potential way to deal with many problems we face in the world today of sustainability and global warming, of meaningful work and employment, and of connection between people? In News from Nowhere, William Morris suggested that the socialist revolution, the bloody battle against the prevailing capitalistic system, could create an egalitarian future society where life around crafting thrives. But I wonder, do we really need a revolution after what we have seen over the century to solve the problems we face? I don't know. But here in this hall, we have chosen to look elsewhere. Have we solved Morris's conundrum? Not at all, not myself yet, but we are still trying, and that's what matters. That, with all the opportunities offered us by the latest technology that probably Morris didn't even anticipate, all the options we have on little screens we carry everywhere with us, all the choices we have in the big box stores. Well, it's here we come each year, this weekend, to celebrate something that's more than a style, something that has become my lifestyle, a life choice, to live life as though it matters. And it's each of your arts and crafts journey, your arts and crafts stories that matters. Well, thank you for sharing your time today, and now let's get out of this dark lecture hall and enjoy a great Arts and Crafts Sunday. And I think William Morris will be really happy with that, and see you next year. Till then.